I'm sorry.
All right, Brayden, you're all set. You're all good to go.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm just gonna do a quick presentation on my week-long like grind to learn a bunch of stuff about Wi-Fi. So yeah, let's get right into it. Bro, everyone just spamming chat with wire. I kind of like it. All right. Who am I? My name is Brayden Werner. I am the club head of education. I'm a third year. I did a co-op over the summer at SRA. I'm currently looking for new positions. And I have done a lot of Linux and radio stuff. That's why I'm doing a no wire wireless presentation today. And I've done everything from black team, red team, and blue team. I've done all three. Through CCDC, I red and black teamed for IRSec, and it'll probably be the same for ISDS. I mean, just black team for ISDS. Cool. Bruh. Oh, it's blocking my memes. That's sad. All right. Anyways, so what's Wi-Fi, man? What's Wi-Fi? So Wi-Fi is really based around the IEEE 802.11 family. You see it when you see like 802.11, B, G, N, all that stuff. It was first introduced in 1997 with 802.11 TAC 1997. Really creative names. You're going to hear a lot of me ranting about that because, yeah. Wi-Fi uses this protocol. So Wi-Fi it's an IEEE standard 802.11, but Wi-Fi is certified by the Wi-Fi Alliance. So there's technically two different organizations working here, but at the end of the day, 802.11 is not technically Wi-Fi, but Wi-Fi is 802.11. Uh, it gets confusing. They're very similar. They're pretty much the same thing. But we're gonna focus on Wi-Fi. No, why is it blocking my memes? This is depressing. Um, anyways, so the 802.11 standard, what is it? So this is everything from your Wi-Fi ranges, which is 1 gigahertz to 6 gigahertz. Normally you hear about 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. There's also this guy clearly. Yeah, I know, right? I'm presenting on Wi-Fi, yet I don't have any. The memes aren't loading. So there's recently introduced 6 gigahertz with Wi-Fi 6, aka 802.11 AX. So yeah, a little small rant here. Basically so there's Wi-Fi 4, 5, and 6, which is actually 802.11 NAC and AX. And then before that, there was A, B, and G. So the reason it starts at 4 is because there was A, B, and G, but they didn't call it Wi-Fi 1, 2, and 3 because they're clowns. So this is why I'm ranting about the Wi-Fi allowance. Anyways, we also have different 802.11 standards that are not like Wi-Fi Alliance, which is like Li-Fi, which is 802.11.bb. You have sub 1 gigahertz IoT bands, which are AH, AF, and even some millimeter wave stuff, which is like 60 gigahertz. It was like 8 gigahertz bandwidth, which is just like stupid, but it's kind of cool. It has really high throughput. Those are listed there. So the NFT authors are mad. Yeah, I tried to steal their image. So let's go into first. We have the 2.4 gigahertz channels. This is where it kind of all started. This is a lot of devices still use these channels today. Most of the time it'll be there's 14, technically 14 channels. The image only shows 13, but although 1, 6, and 11 are the most common just because you need to space it out to avoid any interference. Because if you have overlapping bands, that's a problem for traffic and interference in terms of a Wi-Fi. Every single one of these are 20 megahertz bandwidth. It takes up the entire 2.4 gigahertz range, so that's 2.400 all the way up to 2.499. There's also the number of channels that like the country will use differs on whatever their regulations are. I know the US only uses 1 through 11. I think EU might use 12, and then Japan uses 13 and 14, like on top of all the other ones. The 802.11 standards that use this are B, G, and N. N being Wi-Fi 4, B and G just being B and G because the Wi-Fi Alliance. But yeah, these are the most common. They have decent speed. And so then the other common one is 5 gigahertz channels. So these are confusing. So there's channels like 32 through 177 that are actually used. It goes even higher. Um, Now you may be saying, well, what I'm seeing on this picture is they count every 4, right? No, they count every like 2, so it's like 32, 34, 36. But then sometimes they don't. They'll like skip. It's very confusing. Just know that there's channels between those numbers. Um, and they can have different bandwidths. So you can have a 20 megahertz bandwidth. You have an AP that's only using 20 megahertz bandwidths. Um, this is important for speed. So when you add more bandwidth, you're technically just adding more channels to a single connection. So like you can see there's 20 megahertz, 40, 80, 160. Each time you widen the bandwidth, it's doing this thing called channel bonding, where it's basically adding those channels together and you're getting more throughput in terms of speed. So it all depends on how the AP is configured. If you want to go for more devices so you have more channels to work with, or if you don't have many devices and you want more throughput. There's also some really weird restrictions on terms of what channels are actually used in different regions and what they're for. As you can see, like the FCC guidelines right there, like they have different power regulations. Some of them are, 5 gigahertz channels are really weird. And this is why when you're doing war driving and stuff like that, sometimes you don't get a lot of information because you have to hop between so many different channels and bandwidths. But yeah, this will take up the entire 5 gigahertz range, all the way from 5 gigahertz to 5.99 gigahertz. Yeah. So how is this stuff protected? Well, there's been some different encryption formats. Wireless is not sketchy. It is actually goated. That comment is wrong. WEP was the first one. WEP was garbage. It was still important though, because like it was the first encryption format. It was securing like wireless transmission, but it's garbage. Do not use it. If you see anything using this, you can crack it pretty easily. And then the ones that we see most of today are WPA, WPA2, and WPA3 most recently. WPA was kind of introduced as like an intermediate between WEP and WPA2 because they realized WEP sucked. So they introduced WPA in 2003. So this included, I think it was TKIP, which is like the important thing that it introduced that WEP doesn't have. And then once WPA2 was ready, they released that in 2004. WPA2 has been used for a very long time and it's actually decently secure. There are vulnerabilities and like attacks against it, but for the most part, this is what 99% of devices use is WPA2, whether it's the enterprise mode or the personal mode. Personal mode is basically like you have a password. Enterprise mode is you're authenticating with like a radius server or something else. We'll talk about that later. But WPA3 was recently introduced. They bragged that it was basically uncrackable. It's the most secure thing ever. How did that go? Of course, they found vulnerabilities and attacks against it pretty much right away. But for the most part, they're going to be focusing on WPA3 now. So if you can use it, I would. It's going to get more secure. But WPA2 is pretty proven and WPA3 is new. Do not use WEP. Do not use WPA. I don't even know anything that uses WPA. It was basically just there to be there. But yeah, these are different encryption formats. So how does like Wi-Fi communicate? There has to be some packetized system to do this, kind of like, Ethernet frames. Whoa, there's 802.11 frames. Whoa. When are they making WPA5? I'm making that tomorrow, actually. That's why I'm doing this presentation. So every time you communicate over Wi-Fi or 802.11, they all have this frame format. The main thing I want you to take out of this is that there are 3 different types of frames. There's management frames, control frames, and data frames. Management frames are where all the good information is, usually if you're doing like some sort of attack or listening in or war driving or something like this. This is where you get the information you're looking for, because they also a lot of the times are not encrypted. This is where you have probing, associating, roaming. Probing, basically, it's looking for devices or access points. Associating, roaming, just to keep track of different APs between each other. You can get a lot of good. I know these are really important for controlling how devices interact with the AP, whether they're connecting, disconnecting, are they moving to a different one but on the same network, stuff like that. Um, these are pretty important. Then you have control frames. This is basically just, when can I send data? Can I send data now? Because you can't have two devices sending data at the same time because they'll interfere with each other. You actually should be, there's this thing called RTS, which is a request to send. Your device will ask like, hey, can I send you some data? And it will go, yeah, you can. And then you send it. That's a big part of control frames. That's what they're mostly used for. There's no frame body for those because there's usually not any data. It's usually just like requests or questions and stuff like that. Then you have the actual data frames. These are pretty self-explanatory. This is where you'll have the data that's being sent to the devices. You'll get the request to send, you'll acknowledge it, or the router will acknowledge it, and it'll go, okay, here's the data. Cool, bye. I'm gonna go talk to someone else. These are always pretty much, if you have some sort of authentication or encryption, these will be protected. That's kind of the whole point of like WPA2, so they can't see it. Sometimes it sends null packets for some reason, and there's a lot of like different types of data packets that are not actually implemented yet. So there's a lot of room to play with that in the future. But these are like the frame format. Kind of think about it like the Ethernet frame format, but wireless. It's got all the information you need: the addresses, the data, the type, blah 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 blah. Cool. Wow, we have one meme that worked, and it's the like least funny one. So Wi-Fi networks will operate in different modes. It's mostly between infrastructure and ad hoc / direct. They're kind of the same thing. Infrastructure is the idea that there is a base station, aka an access point, where everything will go to, and it will talk back to everything else, whether it's unicast, multicast, etc. So when you connect to a Wi-Fi network, like say RAT's Wi-Fi or your home Wi-Fi, this is what it's using. It's not going to be using ad hoc. Ad hoc is very common for like phone hotspots. So if you have a phone hotspot, sometimes they do infrastructure, which is kind of crazy, but a lot of the time it will just connect to one device. These are between two endpoints. So they're basically talking to each other. One will probably act as the access point, end quote, but for the most part, it's between two devices. These are also pretty common with like game consoles when they do like that local connection. I don't know if I think that's what a like DS is used for, like chat room, like the what is it, Picto Chat or something. And I know other game consoles will use it so you can like do this, I'm close to you, let's connect and do like chat or play a game or something like that. There's Wi-Fi Direct, which is just the Wi-Fi Alliance version of ad hoc. That's all it is. They had to do something about it. I don't know, because ad hoc is not technically Wi-Fi Alliance. It's its own thing, but it's the same thing. Like it's the same thing. So those are the different modes your network can like operate in. Okay, it's the radio geek in me has come out. We're going to talk about modulation. Oh boy, this is the most confusing part. If you don't understand any of this, sorry. So when you transmit stuff over waves, when there's no wires, you need those waves to mean something. Pretty much all Wi-Fi standards use OFDM, orthogonal frequency division multiplexing. Do I know what that means? Not really. I didn't feel like figuring it out. The name was so complex, and I looked at like information on it. I'm like, damn, this is not real. The fact that someone named it that as well. Basically, it uses QAM. This is the more important part, I'd say. Quadrature amplitude modulation. So I don't know if you remember my radio slide from last year, but basically it uses phase shift keying and amplitude modulation at the same time. So when you transmit a wave, you need it to mean something. So whether that means 1 bits, 2 bits, 4 bits, 8 bits, that's called the symbol rate. That's like the symbols per whatever. So the more symbols you can fit in per basically wavelength is the better. So what they do to this is if you look in the bottom left corner, this is what phase shift keying is. So the signal is combining these two different waves. The signal has its own like phase, and when you shift it forward or back, that's a phase shift. So say you're shifting it forward 1 + 1, which is like 90 + 90. So it's like what 180 degrees or something like that. All those different shifts in the phase of like where the wave is in time is the different bits. And then you add on to this with the AM, where if it's a stronger signal, so if you look in the top right, basically when you shift the phase, you get an angle and it will go to a different angle, and you add on to it by increasing or decreasing the amplitude. So say you get a, I don't know, like a 225-degree shift. That's what we're seeing with that black line right there. And the amplitude is 25%. So it's 25% strength relative to whatever it is. You would get 1100. Now say, yeah, just use the word. If you have 225 degrees, but you have a 75% amplitude, you'd get 1111. So it's shifting these two different things at the same time. You can add more resolution to this by adding basically more sectors. I think Wi-Fi 6, aka 802.11.ax, uses QAM like 1024 or something ridiculous, where there would be 1024 of these dots. So yeah, it gets really, really complicated, but that way you have a lot more data being transmitted with every wavelength. So, all right, Radio Geek over. You can start paying attention now. Yes. So let's talk about security things. There's a handshake. There's a two-way handshake to connect to a network. If it's whatever, we're going to go over the WPA2 one because WPA2 is very common and it's still widely used. We're not going to go over the WPA3 one because I don't want to bash my head against the wall. Even doing WPA2 was a little bit like this. So yeah, it's not actually going to get any less confusing. It's just going to get more confusing. So let's get into it. So part of every handshake, there's four main keys. Yes, so we have the pairwise master key, the group master key, and the pairwise transient and group temporal. So the main point is the master keys are used to generate the temporal keys. And the temporal keys are what is actually used to encrypt the traffic between. And then if we divide it further, the group keys are for any broadcast or multicast traffic, while the pairwise are for any unicast traffic. So if my access point wants to say something to every device on that Wi-Fi network, it would be encrypted with the group temporal key. So every device on that network will have that key. But if it only wants to talk to one device and it doesn't want the other devices to read anything, it will use the pairwise. I think it's supposed to be temporal or it's transit. I don't think it matters. It will use the pairwise key. So only that device will have that key. So the important part is you have keys that are used to help generate the temporal keys, and the two different temporal keys are for unicast and multicast traffic. So those are what the keys are. They are used in every handshake. So how does the handshake actually work? So first, so the one thing I will say before we say any of this is in a WPA2 handshake, the first two parts of the handshake are the only ones that actually really matter. Part 3 and 4 are not always needed. Like you don't always need part 3 and 4 to actually be authenticated the network. And this will be important when we talk about attacks later. So part 1, the AP sends anons, which is a randomly generated number, and then the endpoint will generate a number using that anons. And if it'll use the password. So the PMK, which is the pairwise master key, is basically just the password to your Wi-Fi network. So if we go back, pairwise master key is used to generate, like that's basically just your Wi-Fi password. So it uses the Wi-Fi password to generate this pairwise temporal key using the random numbers that it has. And then it sends it back to the AP like, yo, this is it. And this is the MIC, which is basically just a checksum. And then once the AP receives the random number it used to generate it and the checksum, it will construct, it will know the pairwise temporal key. So basically after the second part of the handshake, both of them have pairwise temporal key, which means they can communicate with each other. And then Part three, the AP will send back the group key that is encrypted, as well as it will confirm like, yo, this is the key, right? And then part four will be like the client will be like, yeah, that's the key. So this four-way handshake, you'll get the pairwise temporal key and the group temporal key so they can communicate with each other, as well as if it sends any broadcast or multicast messages. Um, so that's the handshake process. Part one and two are the most important. Part three and four are not necessary, but they're there. So yes. Also, when I was digging, all right, Easter egg time, literal egg time. I was digging for like information on handshakes, and this just popped up out of a white paper, a quote unquote white paper. I was like, what is happening here? This dude is using like eggs and golden eggs and chickens and like make a white female chicken. All right, I don't know. This was funny. I had to put it in the slides. I was like, what on earth? This is a white paper. Anyways, moving on. All right. So, what are some attacks to WPA2? So, we have this one that was really big back in 2017 called the crack attack. This is a man in the middle attack, and so you know how I was talking about part one and part two of the handshake? Well, basically we have that MIC, which is like a checksum. It's checksumming stuff. And then so what the crack attack does is that man in the middles, it's an evil twin. It's like, hey, I'm this network, and it starts sending like fake part three of the handshakes um back to the client to get it to like hack it. And it will keep sending this until it has enough information back from the client that is able to actually guess the temporal key, the pairwise temporal key. So then you'll basically be authenticated to the network and you'll be able to read any traffic through that. That was a terrible explanation. If you want more information, just look it up. It's called crack attack. You'll see a bunch of things. So group temporal keys, there's a paper basically posted that's saying that, yeah, the RNG sucks and we can predict it. I think that was fixed, but yeah, so basically there's a way to guess how the random number generation to GTK keys, and you can guess the key from that if you get lucky enough. Then we have dictionary attacks. You can do dictionary attacks against WPA2. There's two different ways you can do this. There's one more modern way, which uses a PKMID. This is just a special value that's used for roaming. So when you go in between two different access points, it keeps tracks of the devices and their keys using this PKMID, which actually contains is like it's a mathematical, like I think it's a checksum or like a hash or something, but basically it contains information about the key, like hashed or whatever, but you can crack against it. So if you are able to capture this PKMID, you can do a dictionary attack against it where you can check against it, and once you know you get a match, you'll have the password. Or you can use the old method where you get a four-way handshake and you use the information from that four-way handshake, whether it's like the randomly generated numbers and all this, to try and check against to try and find the password. These will only work against WPA2 PSK, which is pre-shared key. So if you have a password on your Wi-Fi network, you can only do, well, you can probably do it against the other one, but I don't know if it'd be a dictionary attack. But you know, if you have a plain text password, you can check against it with these. If you have enterprise, it's not really going to use like a password, so it'd be a little different. And then recently there's the crook vulnerabilities, which are client side. Basically, I think it was Broadcom, they had about 1 billion chips that had this flaw. So there's this state called disassociation, which is where like it's a certain state in 802.11 where when they reached this state, they would just automatically set the keys to all zero. What happened is people figured out how to keep devices in this disassociation state for an extended period of time. So like they were technically disassociated, but they're still, you know, like communicating. So then the traffic was basically like super easy to unencrypt because you knew the key was going to be all zeros. So that was something I know that was patched, but it would affected I think about 1 billion devices. So that was a pretty big deal. Let's talk about WPA3 real quick. This came out in 2018. It uses this thing called a dragonfly handshake for the I genuinely don't really know what it is. I looked at it. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, Jesse, what are you talking about? Yeah, basically right away, people found vulnerabilities. the Dragon Blood vulnerabilities. These are like a family of vulnerabilities that they found. I think they found like 4 or 5 separate ones, which is like we have like okay, and this is after them claiming that it was basically uncrackable, and they're just like, yeah, okay, buddy, whatever. And the big part of this is I know that a big part of some of the vulnerabilities is it actually has backwards compatibility to WPA2. People found a way to force downgrade it and then use like the vulnerabilities we talked about recently against it. So that's kind of like that. It is yeah, never say something is uncrackable. People were just like, oh really, okay, and then they found like 4 or 5 different vulns with it. The main thing that this introduced is it brings management frame protection. So those management frames we talked about earlier were not protected, they were to anyone. WPA3 fixes this. It has a method to protect these frames. Yeah, it also has brute force protection using some method called simultaneous authentication of equals. I don't really know what it is. Apparently, it helps with brute force because it's like even if you have the password, so something, something, something. But I think that was one simultaneous authentication of equals was something they actually found a vulnerability with, so that turned out well. But yeah, WPA3, it's new. I'm pretty sure they're fixing these vulnerabilities as they find them. If I'm not mistaken, I sure hope so. But yeah, it's got some cool features, but of course it has vulnerabilities because why wouldn't it? Nothing is uncrackable. All right. So what other wireless attacks are like just general wireless attacks that you can do? You have evil twin attacks, which I talked about, which is where you basically pose as an access point or a Wi-Fi network. You have people authenticate with you and you just forward all that traffic to the internet so it doesn't look like anything's weird. But actually, because you saw the entire encryption process and you know the key, you can just see all their traffic. Now, they're using HTTPS or encrypted, traffic, like that you have to unencrypt that too. But if there's like HTTP traffic or something like that, you can see all of it. Wow, 2 people just joined Discord. There's also malicious association. This is just some method to associate with an AP. I don't know. I saw it and I put it down. I will be honest. I do not remember exactly what it is. But it's a malicious way to associate with an AP. I think this is just a way to be able to like say you're part of a network using some sort of fuzzing. Denial of service, you can do this many ways. You can literally just straight up jam the radio like signals, which don't piss off the FCC. That's why that's there. So you can literally just blast 2.4 gigahertz and just basically interfere with all Wi-Fi. You can do this through deauthentication attacks. So there's a thing you can do where one of the management frames types is a deauthentication, which basically means forget who I am. I'm no longer on the network. My key no longer exists. And you can send that. You can do it in a way where it will do that for devices and basically disconnect them so they have to reconnect again and re-authenticate with like a full handshake and everything. So that's another way you can DOS. But there are many of ways you can do DOSing with wireless. Packet injection, pretty self-explanatory, because there are just wireless things flowing throughout the air. If you can figure out a way, you can inject your own packets. It's not like there's a wire that you can like plug into. It's like you can just kind of broadcast it. If you do it in the right way, you can get the router or the client to think that traffic's legitimate. What wire? I don't know, man. I don't know what wire. What wire? What wire? Um, there's also MAC spoofing because a lot of times Wi-Fi networks will have some sort of MAC address filtering. So yeah, you can just spoof your MAC address. Easy mode, literally easy mode. All right. What are some good prevention techniques? Please use the newest encryption standards. If you're using WEP, you are actually a clown. You are literally the biggest clown in the circus. Use WPA2 or WPA3, please. Both of them honestly work. WPA3 is most likely preferred, but a lot of devices don't support it. Use MAC filtering. Obviously, you can just do, spoof your MAC address, but why not? Every little bit helps. Every little bit helps. You can also hide your SSID, which is more of an obfuscation technique than a security technique, but it helps. Once again, every little bit helps. You don't want to just be broadcasting your SSID everywhere. Use enterprise instead of pre-shared key. Do not try if you don't have to use passwords and you can use like an authentication server, do so. This will be very good against preventing dictionary attacks and like brute forcing stuff like that. So use enterprise WPA if possible. Not WPA1. I'm talking WPA2 or 3, please. If you do use pre-shared key, please use a good password. As soon as somebody catches a handshake, bro, they just run. If that's in Rock you, you're toasted. Like you're actually toasted. They're gonna get the password if they capture that handshake. So make sure that you have a good password and change it often, or you just use WPA3 because apparently it prevents all dictionary attacks. Um, Also, if you have the ability to use a wireless IDS, I know a lot of APs have things built in where they'll detect certain actions or techniques. You can also use Kismet because Kismet is goaded. I don't know why I wouldn't use it. I don't know about Kismet enterprise situation, but like it does some IDS. So, but yeah, have some good wireless security. Let's go. Um, so what are some alternatives to Wi-Fi? So say, hey, Wi-Fi stinky. I hate the Wi-Fi alliance. What can I use? We have Bluetooth. You see that all the time. AirPods, headphones, Apple Pens. A lot of devices use Bluetooth because it's easy, it's low power, it's short range. It's all you need. There's this thing called WiMAX. It's basically long range Wi-Fi. That's kind of all it is. It's also an 802.11. It's not an 802.11 standard, but it's an IEEE 802 standard. I think it uses like 3 gigahertz, something in that range. It's used for some enterprise things. It's not really used for personal use. If you got a phone, you can use 4G, 5G, whatever G you want. They're cellular. This is, just another form of internet that you can use. Most phones use it when Wi-Fi isn't available. Then there's LoRa, which is like a long range, low data rate. I think this is common in things like weather stations. I think this is like 433 megahertz and like 900 megahertz. So you see this in like IoT devices, stuff like that. And it's pretty low power and long range. Like I said, I know my weather station at home uses it. So yeah. And then Zigbee, which is an IoT mesh framework. I haven't actually seen a lot of use in the real world personally, but it is definitely a new protocol that seems to be being used for like mesh networks and IoT devices. So yeah, I think that is everything. So I'm looking at the Twitch chat, which has literally just been going berserk. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Twitch chat. Otherwise, I will end it there. I'll wait like 10 seconds. What will you project on next, Radio Man? I don't know. IDS, intrusion detection system. So like a wireless intrusion detection system. That's what it stands for. It'll detect certain techniques that people use for wireless. That'll be cool. All right. I have no questions because I don't know what answers I need to know. A Perez on wireless IDS IPS. You can't intrude on wires though, right? I mean, that's not true at all. You can put things in line. In fact, there's a wireless technique to snoop on HDMI traffic, so you can definitely intrude on wires. Rip bozo. Wireless wins again. Yeah. All right. I think I'm good on questions, Tension.